Good morning. We'll call the meeting to order. We respectfully acknowledge that the Township of Algonquin Highlands is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We also acknowledge a historical shared presence of other Indigenous nations throughout the area, and we recognize these original inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Just a note about the agenda, we will be removing the AMPS discussion onto our next council meeting as the presenter is ill today. So could I have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Councillors Barry and Shortreed.
Moved by Councillor Barry, second by Councillor Shortreed, be it resolved the March 6, 2025 agenda be approved as amended.
All in favor? That's carried. Just as a note, that also includes all the associated bylaws attached to it. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof today? Hearing none, could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the minutes of February the 20th, February the 27th special meeting, and February the 28th special meeting? Councillors Richards, Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Richards, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayu, be it resolved the February 20th regular meeting and February 27th, 28th special meeting minutes be approved as circulated.
All in favor? That's carried. So we have no public meetings, delegations, or presentations. And there is nothing listed on the consent agenda this week. So item number 11 has been removed from the agenda. So the first up is the discussion about the Recreation Committee and possible community partnerships and how we move forward with recreation. You want to come up and join us, Mr. Card? So one of the challenges has proved for committee members to travel the distances they've been traveling from, between Oxtongue and Stanhope, particularly in bad weather. And some, I guess I would have to say disappointment on the part of Oxtongue Lake and the dissolution of the three committees into one. We had hoped that it would help to better identify the municipality as a whole and bring us together. And obviously that goal has not worked in this particular regard. So I guess it's just open for discussion and thoughts about how we see ourselves moving forward. I personally have kind of come to the conclusion that, we need to have some discussions with the folks in Oxtongue about returning the use of the building to the Oxtongue folks and how we go about that, whether they set up their own committee, what kind of agreements we need to have in place. So we'll have to talk about that aspect. And then what we do with the rest of the municipality, whether we go back to three committees. Although having said that, I also recognize that for some reason or other, despite the populations, Stanhope has not always been strong when it came to their own recreation committee. So whether we would look at the possibility of having a separate group deal with Dorset and Stanhope together, I just open to discussions as well as the possibility of partnerships with different groups and organizations. I know that I've had a couple of things suggested to me that are specific to certain activities. One of the things that Councillor Richards had suggested early on was, partnering with lake associations. And I have had conversations with several lake associations who are having the same challenges that we are in finding volunteers to run their own events. And, a little bit of hesitation and fear about taking on something that's municipal wide. Going back to Oxtongue, I would hope that part of our discussions would address the issue of Canada Day in Oxtongue, because that's been a tradition that I would really like us to hold on to. It's been a wonderful event. I'd like to see us continue with that if at all, if they're in agreement. But anyway, at this point, like I guess we'll go to Chris and see what thoughts he's got, and then we'll open the discussion up. Sorry to put you on the spot, Mr. Card.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's certainly a lot to consider. Just to summarize a couple of items, I did just before Christmas, I believe it was, Deputy Mayor Dayu reached out to me, and we did have a discussion about the possibility and ideas of some sort of community-led program for the Oxtongue Lake Community Center, where a committee or a board or something of that nature as a volunteer-led group would take care of that center and the programming within it. From my understanding at the time, Deputy Mayor Dayu was going to perhaps have an opportunity to have some of those discussions with some of her constituents there. So I'd be interested to hear if there's any updates on that. I echo the sentiment of you, Mayor. I think that our thoughts around moving from 3 committees to 1 aligned with what we wanted to do as far as having a united feel to recreation within the township. And it was disappointing, really, I guess, just to see that didn't work out as we had hoped. However, again, the opportunities were still there to be able to have all the same volunteers come out and assist with the same programs. And as you know, I think there was some unfortunate sort of sentiments around how that formed and what happened there, and a resulting situation where people weren't, I guess, as likely to want to help out in some of the events that they helped out with previously. And we were able to still run those events such as Canada Day successfully with staff. I've been involved in all 3 committees, having come to them, of course, as they had many years under their belt. And then, of course, was involved throughout the formation of the committee, the single committee, and was intimately involved in that for a number of months while our recreation coordinator had other things happening. And what I found to be a common theme throughout all of them is not whatever seemed to be sort of a clear direction as to exactly what each committee wanted to achieve or what was hoped to be achieved. And certainly there was a lot of great success in events, a lot of great success in programs that they run, a lot of fantastic volunteerism, which we know is dwindling and continues to do so. But then just sort of what I'd see is kind of a continual conversation of what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do we think we should do? So as we have this discussion, I think it'd be helpful first to maybe think about where it is, what our goals are in recreation. And I know that we have on the horizon a recreation master plan, which I think would inform a lot of those things. But starting with the goals, where it is that we want to get. And for an example, I could say just hypothetically, like, do we want, 10% more recreation per capita? Do we want an equal number of recreational program opportunities per capita within each community? Do we want to engage X amount of volunteers, setting some of those key performance indicators and understanding what our end goal is, and then be able to work back from there and how we might fill that. And if it's through a committee, that same sort of direction would end up being to a committee. These are the goals that we want to achieve. This is exactly what we want you to do. We want you to be involved in just events, or we want you to be involved in developing X amount of programs. So I'd hope, and I think anyways, from my perspective, that it'd be beneficial to start with understanding what that end goal is and what it is we want to achieve, and then work to fill that through all of these various aspects. Without knowing that, I can't know how best to fill that or make recommendations on how to fill that first. To touch, if I can, just quickly on the lake associations, I know that there's a number of lake associations, as we all know. I know that some of them have a significant amount of sort of ongoing activities that they've had over the years that have been amazing and very successful. And we certainly hear from them. We support them with the use of our space, et cetera. But at the staff level and the committee level, we haven't ever received any outreach from them for a desire to want to partner. So how that might look, I'm not entirely sure, and how we might start that conversation, but we haven't heard that from them in any way. So looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts and maybe coming in again after that, but that's my input up front.
One of the things that really did excite me was the results of the survey that we put out and the thoughts that people had about the programs that they wanted, the comments that, like, I would love to be involved in this activity or that activity, just not everything. You know, there was a lot of really good information there that I think that the committee might have been overwhelmed by. And yet I really do believe that if we go back and revisit that survey, you know, once we, you know, get a grip on exactly what our goals are for recreation, that there's a lot of ideas there that we can tap into and work with. So I'm open to hearing comments about, you know, your thoughts overall, what direction we might go in, and responses. Councillor Short-Reed.
The other big problem I think we have is, especially in Dorset, for volunteers, we have the Lions, we have the museum, we have the partnership, we have the hub, we have the church ladies. I don't know if I've got them all. There's so many groups that already have so many volunteers. It's hard for us to get volunteers when they're already volunteered to all these other groups. And that's a lot of groups for a little town, a lot of groups. So, and we saw that with the rec committee, and we've seen it. Like the rec committee in Stanhope was, I do believe, the soccer committee that got changed into the rec committee. So they were all there for soccer. And so when we got changed to the rec committee, there wasn't an interest, right? And then with Dorset, we're just so limited to volunteers because people have already committed to so many other groups, right? And another issue too is all of these groups, there's no young people on the committees. Like, we definitely need young people as well.
And how to encourage that is a challenge. Yeah, it seems like the whole philosophy for volunteerism is becoming outdated, you know, as the older generation no longer can help or have the energy or desire to continue. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Yeah, I think Councillor Short-Reed's comment is actually quite astute. It's a good observation that people do tend to focus on the very specific elements of recreation that they are interested in.
Mhm.
That is what is happening. And one option for us is to follow the flow. You know, if that is how people naturally congregate in a community setting, maybe that is the model that we should be working towards. I think that's a really great first comment to get our brains ticking over.
It's just how to go about doing
About
that.
how to go about doing it. If I might address the Oxtongue Lake
Okay.
question, thank you for that introduction. I'm delighted to hear that your thoughts are aligned in that way, and certainly it sounds like there is an opening at the minute to reconsider how we look at Oxtongue, and the reason being. The other two community centers, well, Dorset is for Dorset and for the entire township. It is a township-wide facility, and also supports the specific Dorset community. Stanhope supports about 15 or 17 lakes in this area. It's one community center that it really can host folks from a broad variety of the southern part of the township. At Oxtongue, our community center very much supports two lakes, Oxtongue and Lucy. And Lucy has, I think, 7 properties on them. It's very small. Oxtongue has, the 250 or thereabouts. And I think that it offers an opening to reconsider how, as the mayor was saying, how we might be able to negotiate a return of the governance of that space to that lake association or a different committee, or who knows, we haven't even entered down that road, but something that would allow the Oxtongue Lakers to take responsibility and liability for the community center that really still provides offerings for them.
Mhm.
So I did chat with Mr. Card before the Christmas vacation, just to find out, is this done anywhere else? Do you, are you aware of this sort of thing, within a municipal structure? Got some great feedback from him. And I have since spoken to a number of stakeholders at Oxtongue. I've spoken to the individuals who used to be members of the Oxtongue Lake Community Center Committee. I've spoken to other private members of the public who were not members of that committee or were members many, many years ago at its inception. And I have also spoken to the executive of the Oxtongue Lake Association, which is the Lake Association. And they all have expressed an openness, keenness, and genuine desire to explore this with the township. So whether it is, for example, leasing the community center from the township under negotiated terms, or some other entirely different concept, but that draws it back towards the governance of the local committee, I think there would be benefits for both the folks around the lake, but also for the township. I can see that working for everyone, and there is a solid willingness there at the lake. So I think my interest in terms of today's conversation would be to see council's approval or agreement to enter that road and see if we might parse Oxtongue Lake off from our more general conversations about recreation, and just walk that road separately.
So was it your sense that when you spoke to people, part of me wishes I'd been part of some of those conversations or would look forward to discussions in the future, was there an acceptance that if they were to assume responsibility for the building and managing, the activities that take place there, that there would be responsibility on their part for things like insurance? I mean, I'm just naming that as one, so they acknowledged that that might be the case?
Oh, very much. They certainly acknowledge that those are the questions that would have to be sorted out. They would like to know how other townships and community centers and communities have negotiated these terms so that we don't reinvent the wheel entirely, because there's probably a lot to learn from that. But they're very much aware that, liability would largely fall with the Oxtongue Lakers, and there are other terms that would simply have to be negotiated. So they're certainly not going into it blind. And I think they and I are heartened by the fact that within our neighboring municipalities, there are a couple of really interesting examples of where this has not only worked, but worked incredibly successfully. And so somehow, whatever the liability, lease, fee structure, et cetera, that has worked for them could probably inform our conversations. Yeah.
So I guess before we, broaden the discussion, I'd like to hear from other members of council on their thoughts about separating Oxtongue, from the overall discussion. Councillor Shortreed.
Having just been on the 3 committees, it's a very interesting idea. I'd like to see more on how that would work, and it's just, we're so spread out here that having something like that might work really, really well.
I find it somewhat, I mean, I see that it's inevitable, that that's probably the direction that we might go. However, it does disappoint me because, I mean, we want to try and unite the municipality as one municipality. And, you know, this just strengthens the separation or the division that was in place before.
It's getting used all the time. That's great.
Pardon me?
If it's getting used a lot, that's a bonus.
Councillor Richards and then Councillor Barry.
I'm understanding why we're having the conversation this way, but I'm not agreeing that we need to be having the conversation this way. When I talk about partnerships with lake associations as an example, it's an example. It's not, we're only gonna have partnerships with lake associations. It's to have partnerships with any organization within our community. It could be the Dorset Partnership, it could be the Lions, it could be a lake association, it could be Oxtongue Lake Association, it could be any of them. What I'm talking about is us providing funding throughout the municipality for recreation to outside organizations to hold recreation that will encompass all of the general public, not just their private members. As we've mentioned, this is about there not being enough volunteers in the community. They're stretched thin. They're already involved in so many of these organizations. But collectively, they may be willing to utilize these spaces that we have to hold these events that they are sometimes holding already and could benefit from the additional supports. Maybe it's someone out there who wants to start something new and can bring a proposal for that to happen. In any case, it's utilizing all of our recreational facilities. And giving that back to the public in their power to be involved in how they want to be involved, not simply these are the recreational programs we have traditionally offered or events we've done, and we need you to volunteer towards them whether you like it or not, because you're a part of a recreation committee. So it's empowering. It's what other communities are already doing. Hamilton has a huge one that by no means do I suggest we go to that extent. Lake of Bays has a small one. And I disagree with their lack of controls that they have put on it, but I think they're going to soon learn their lesson from doing that. You know, because we don't want to get ourselves involved in a political organization holding events. There's a lack of rules within Lake of Bays that could happen. So we need to have those rules. We need to iron them out. We need to protect the township. We need to protect the public, but we need to empower the public to be involved. And that's kind of the basis of the discussions we had at the rec committee as it was ending. And we actually had unanimous support from the rec committee to move forward in that direction. It's unfortunate the membership of the rec committee was so small that it couldn't handle the amount of events that there were. And the problem that I think led to that was that in every instance of the committee, new events were added because new members were added that wanted to see new things. And unfortunately, in maintaining all of those things, what happens is when you run out of volunteers, it ends up then becoming the responsibility of staff. And we can't let that happen. We don't have enough staff to do that, and it's unfair.
I was looking for thoughts on, I generally speaking, you know, I see that there's lots of room for further discussion, but I was asking, the question was your thoughts on what we do with Oxtongue specifically and whether you agree with.
And so that's what I'm saying is I don't agree with having a separate conversation. I think I want to hear more, but I think the conversation should be about the entire township, not just Oxtongue separately from everywhere else.
Counselor Berry.
Well, I don't know. I guess I've sat on the rec committees for pretty much since my first time on council.
At least 8 years.
At least 8 years. I haven't been on this previous sort of iteration. I do feel that part of the reason, yes, I agree with Counselor Shortreed that there's a lot of, people already involved in certain volunteers with a small group that can't put it, we don't have the force of people to be on the committees. I also think that when we kind of branched off into 3 separate committees, it was also during COVID, and it was also during the rec center being not available for use. And it was also before we started having electronic meetings. So I do think that those 3 factors could possibly be different now by maybe having, instead of, I think a lot of the volunteers want to help with events, but they maybe don't want to sit on a committee. And then sometimes there's situations where people want to sit on a committee, but they don't want to work on events. But I do think there's an opportunity for there to be sort of an overarching rec, arts, culture sort of group that oversees that there is, a diversity in all of 3 parts of the municipality. And then maybe from there, there's a subcommittee for each community. I do think that there's like, and I think there's already a lot of rec happening that aren't part of our committees that staff is well involved with. Like I'm thinking the swim program, the soccer, skiing, yoga, pickleball, like a lot of those things are already happening, which would fall under rec anyway. And I think if there's more activities that need to be put in place, we need to look at the municipality as a whole. Like, what are those? Are those, who are our target market? Like, I know Chris has done a lot of work on this of like, we have kids, teens, adults, families, seniors. No matter what we do in rec, we can't, each event isn't going to attract all of those people. There might be a small portion that are family events, but for the most part, a speaker series or something isn't necessarily going to engage the young kids unless it's, wildlife or something. But you know what I mean? I think targeting some literary events, some maybe low density sports, some cultural events, some social events. My one hesitation with letting Oxtongue sort of slip off onto their own entity, in some ways that was sort of done already with Club 35. And in the end, it sort of fell through as well. So I'm a little hesitant of separating off before we look at rec as a whole.
And I'm glad to hear you mention arts and culture and building that in. I mean, because there is a wonderful arts community here, in Algonquin Highlands and in the county. And I don't know that we pay enough attention or include that enough in our activities and in our thought processes. Go ahead, then, and I'll go back over to
Sorry,
Deputy
just
Mayor
one thing
Day.
about that. One thing that I think that has worked really well for decade, at least, there's been this Ukrainian Easter egg event that has always had a huge turnout. And it's just rotated annually between all 3 parts of the municipality. So I think having some of those things where it's like we have an event that moves around is also another option, rather than having a menu in each place for every year, having it like something that can move around.
Deputy Mayor Day.
Thanks for all of those comments. On the Oxtongue piece, the way I visualize it is not a wholesale cleaving of the Oxtongue Lake group from the rest of the township. The question I have in my mind is regarding the governance of that building. Like, can we somehow bring the governance of what happens inside that building back into the local sphere in a way that absolutely works for the township, knowing that it is a township asset. When it comes to the broader, how do we work with lake associations? How do we bring people together? What sort of programming do we offer? Do we have a hat committee and then smaller committees locally? I think Oxford can very much stay inside that conversation. But if our conversation goes in the direction of the rec committees being part and parcel of how and what programming is brought to the recreation centers we have, then that's where I would want to see Oxtongue painted with a slightly different brush. So it's separate, but I think with the overarching plan, Oxtongue very much still plays a part in recreation thinking.
Just one point, I think that we need to maybe try and think in terms, instead of saying lake associations, when we think in terms of partners, just use the terminology partners. Because there are different associations like, I don't know, Rotary, the Lions, lots of different groups that we could partner with. And I just recently had someone suggest that, and I'm sorry, Chris, I meant to speak to you about this before saying this, but, really positive comments made about the Frost Center ski trails and our ski trails, but a possibility for a partnership there that is outside of Algonquin Highlands, but something that could work with with another cross-country ski organization. So there's lots of different partnerships that we can be looking at that are not necessarily lake associations. And I didn't mean to suggest that in my opening comments, that it's just one of the concerns that was raised about lake associations, because they do try and offer events. More thoughts about where we might move forward with this? Councillor Richards.
I think I'm having trouble understanding this separation of Oxtongue. Are you suggesting that Oxtongue wants to take over not ownership, but control of the building from the municipality?
Go ahead.
The terminology is something that obviously has to work for both, and there has to be a real understanding of that terminology on both sides. But I'll give you an example of one concept in a neighboring township that very much mirrors the sort of outcome that we would want, that we're thinking about for Oxtongue. There is a neighboring township where they have a small community center with very much the same history as Oxtongue Lake. It was a single room school. It then became a community-run community center. Then it was given over to the township to administer because costs were getting high, et cetera, et cetera. And what they have now is, I believe, a 99-year lease between the township, who still owns the asset, and the community group who runs all of the events inside the asset. And there are 3 or 4 different activities that take place in that community center every week throughout most of the year. And I don't know any of the terms of that lease. That has not been discussed, but I like the idea that by saying, okay, here are the keys, you're taking responsibility for what happens inside the building under all of these terms that we've negotiated, financial and otherwise. There has been a real regeneration of life and use of that building because there is some local conceptual ownership there. So it's that outcome that I'm after. And whether it is a lease or whether there is a different form of community engagement agreement, that's we're at the starting block of that conversation. But indeed, that's the concept.
The one thought that comes to my mind is that, no matter what we did with respect to the structure of the recreation committee or a number of recreation committees, even by consolidating it, nothing stopped the folks in Oxtongue from saying, we want to hold this event or we want to hold that event. But that didn't happen. It just seemed like all of a sudden everything ceased. And I don't really quite understand that. I mean, it's sort of, there was nothing stopping that from happening. I mean, they could have held any event that they wanted, and yet that didn't go forward. And I don't really understand that. Nobody was stopping them.
Yeah, and I can't speak to that in any great detail. I certainly wouldn't want to speak for them as a whole. I do think the nature of community engagement has changed, and that's why we are seeing these, changes in our volunteering and rentals and everything else across the board. I think by starting a conversation with them on these lines, it gives them an opportunity to try to kickstart that for themselves again. It then is in their hands to work out with the sort of supports that we negotiate from, from the township end. But to the rationale behind the interruption in the use of that space, I think there's probably some demographics and philosophy and psychology all involved in that. And I wouldn't be able to give an answer that adequately reflects what they think.
Councillor Barry.
I guess I support the idea in some ways. In other ways, I'm like, well, like, how would that even work in regards to like, there's reserves in place? And, you know, a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, we did the substance review of all the buildings. And so that's been done. All the buildings have been rectified. But like, if there was another substance thing, how would that be operated? Like, I just think there's some logistics in the leasing of the events, leasing of the space for the events, but the overhead and the infrastructure would be still on the township.
Go ahead.
Indeed, once you start thinking about all of the details that would have to be resolved, it's quite a bit. And in exploring a little bit what has happened in other townships, not next door, but a little bit further afield in Ontario, it has been told to me that the upfront work to figure out the arrangement is, substantial. There's quite a number of things to figure out. But once the upfront work is done, then it can be a very simple experience from there then on out. So I see what you're saying as a very legitimate question to bring to the table if and when we start to negotiate those terms, but not something that the fear of the question should stop us from having the conversation, if you see what I mean. I think all of these questions have been resolved in other townships. So I have faith that we can figure out those answers too.
So you did mention a township in proximity to Oxtown who's had success in that direction. So I think we need to know what group that is and take a look at the agreement that they've got. So that's something that we'd have to reach out, and I would look to staff to reach out to do that. Councillor Richards.
Yeah, I think, I was prepared to have a conversation on the future of recreation committees, not separating a building from township assets. So I'm wholly unprepared for this conversation today. Doesn't mean I'm not willing to not have it, but I need a whole lot more information to really continue the conversation in a meaningful way.
Well, that is just one aspect of what we do with recreation and recreation committee. We've heard kind of loud and clear for some time now that there is a school of thought in Oxtown, that there is some, hard feelings, unfortunately, from the folks in Oxtown, and, somehow we need to resolve that. And that is one option for us to look at as a, overall arching overview on recreation as a whole. I mean, it's still about recreation and about the committee. And if I think that's one of the aspects that we have to resolve, whether we're willing to go forward with investigating that or not, and then how we move forward with the committee or the activities that we want to hold. And I mean, part of me is thinking, okay, I think we need to revisit the survey that we had done. I mean, there was a lot of really good information there, or maybe we need to do another survey. It's a way of reaching out to the public to see, okay, here's where we're at. What are your thoughts about how we go forward? Councillor Barry, then Councillor Shortreed.
I think it was my hope, probably other council members as well, that by having one committee, that there would be a cohesion and there would be, equal opportunities throughout the municipality and sort of spotlight different events in all areas. I do think that if the committee could meet digitally, Possibly there would be more uptick. I think a lot of people didn't like the travel. I think that's a consideration. And then my one consideration or concern with the splitting out of Oxtongue, I mean, I have several, would be that the events that would be run by a private group, would they be as, not advertised, but will they be trying to engage the entire municipality, or would it become Oxtongue specific? Because I think, Snowball, for an example, I know that's a big event, probably not an event that would happen in Oxtongue, but that is community wide. And I think, the soccer program doesn't just want to have Stanhope participants. I mean, we have people from Dysart as well. So I think that's my one concern, is I think I'm looking at like sort of a holistic approach and not trying to further divide the community.
How about Councillor Short-Reed and then yourself?
Communities know what they want. And both Deputy Mayor Dayu's ideas and Councillor Richard's partnership ideas are great. Because sitting on a committee, you're almost guessing what the communities want. So, I live in Dorset and I'm guessing what the community in Stanhope wants. Right? So I think like the partnership idea is letting community members do what communities want to do in specific communities.
It's all rolling around in my head. Go ahead.
To the Oxtongue point, however, I think the key word that was used by Madam Mayor was investigate. I'm certainly not proposing that we agree anything today at all beyond nodding to the idea of looking down that road as a possibility and seeing if it would work for the township, which it may or may not. And seeing if it would work for the overall spirit of recreation in the township, which it may or it may not. But we can't start to think it through in a detailed way or ask staff to do any thinking about it at all unless council says, yeah, this is worthy of a little bit more thought, and we'll come back and look at it again with a little bit more information.
I just don't want us to go ahead and start, even what is thought to be negotiations. I mean, I would say, like you say, investigate. But sometimes investigation plants an idea in folks' heads that, okay, we're going to go in this direction, and only to find out that in the end, we don't want to go in this direction. I do want it, whatever we ask staff to do, we need to land on an agreement about, okay, this is the direction we'd like to go next in this path of trying to resolve the issue that we've got. Because it's a concern to me, and we can't ask, right now we have, I know that you're involved. But technically, we've got one recreation person who's being asked to do a lot. We don't want to, it's got to be broader than that. There's got to be more, more involvement in one way or another. I'm going to go to Chris and then over to you, Councillor Barry.
Thank you, Mayor. I really do think the idea and concept of one committee was a great idea and a great concept. And I think the survey led to them working down the path of then creating some recommendations and having some discussions about what should come out of that survey. And then there was the challenge of a couple of members were lost. We had a number of big events happening all at the same time, which we had issues with getting volunteer numbers for. And those things combined just kind of took the wind out of the sails of that happening. And that's to say, the continual challenge tends to be numbers of people. And we talked about this at the committee. You'd recall a number of times that we just need more people. We need more volunteers. So to have one committee that we can task with the idea of doing programming or events relative to the survey works perfectly if you have people and you have people with the enthusiasm to lead that charge. And we had it for a little while, but we just lost them. So it comes back to volunteer numbers, and something we haven't talked about yet or hasn't been brought up yet during this discussion. It has a little bit in other discussions, is what if we move towards staff-led and volunteer recruitment, event specific. And then staff develop parameters around, in conjunction with council, of course, around the how the programs get distributed across the township and how we have fair equity and everybody's covered in that regard. But if we were to go back to some form of a committee, and may it be one committee again, and we were able to find the people, we're still gonna have that challenge of the volunteers. And then what I saw happening and council saw happening was sometimes the committee had to say, we can't do this event, we don't have the people, and that's where it comes back to staff. So if we're going to do that, and we recognize that the staff may not always have the ability to fill all those roles, and we don't always have the volunteers stepping forward to do them, I think we need to accept the fact that sometimes the committee is going to say, we have to cancel that Christmas tree lighting event, we don't have the people, or we have to cancel that Canada Day event, unfortunately. And then they have to rejig it and learn from that opportunity and come back with new ideas the next year and just kind of let it happen organically. Some of the most successful committees I see, and one of them, and I can only guess about the organization you might be referring to with a ski type organization, is that, and I see this in trails organizations a lot and committees, is they're often led by individuals or a couple of individuals who are extremely enthusiastic. And I'm sure we see this on any of the committees that we see are successful now, even within our own township. And once you lose those individuals,
It starts to fall apart.
and I can see that happening with any successful committee that has these individuals, that some of them, I look at them of trails organizations I know and I say, wow, there's a person who's literally putting in 40, 50, 60 hours of work a week as a volunteer and love it and do a fantastic job. When that person's gone, what happens? Can't always have a crystal ball and predict the future, but from that, just to summarize, I'd like to consider the option of moving towards a staff-led model where we do volunteer recruitment, or if we move back towards one committee, understanding that there's going to be times that as they form, they're going to fall down. We're going to have pitfalls. We're going to have times that events just can't be run the same way as we might have to if we were just to ask our recreation coordinator to say, you need to run the snowball. Well, we need 20 volunteers on average to help out on the day of. What do we do if we don't have them all? You know, maybe in the future, and that's where staff could then look at that and say, you know what, we just don't have the volunteers. If council still wants to run it, maybe we need to hire some event staffing similar to what we do for fall colors at the tower. Those are my thoughts on all the points that have been raised thus far.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that you said staff can do with respect to, you know, finding volunteers, putting out a call for volunteers and maybe even slotting them into certain places. I see that, you know, the staff can do that. I also think that one of the things that you know, as part of our strategic plan is to be open to provide as much opportunity for the public to be involved in the things that we do. And I don't want to move too far away from that. You know, it just takes away the opportunity to hear from public members. And that's the benefit of having a committee made up of residents from the community, because then you're hearing what your people really want instead of staff trying to figure out what people want. And I will say that the survey that was done, there were individuals who specifically said, if you ran this program, I'd really love to help. And I don't think that we followed, or we didn't have the opportunity to follow up on those things. I mean, we were just struggling to try and keep what we had in place running without starting something new. But there was lots there that could have been quite exciting if we had reached out to those individuals and investigated things a little bit further. Whose hand was next? Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Yeah, from a logical, practical perspective, I really like the idea that Chris brings, and he's raised that in the past, and so it's good to have that reminder. do you have any sense of how it might overlap successfully with some of the ideas that Councillor Richards has brought and that the committee brought with regards to partnering or sponsoring, supporting lake associations to do things for themselves as well? Like, could there be any kind of overlap at all? Or do you see that as being two models and we choose A or we choose B? And I put that out to everyone. I just wonder, in your mulling, have you thought about that?
I can't see why both couldn't be possible. I think staff would likely have to take the lead role in the development of such a program, as it were. And I also don't think that such a program would ultimately meet all of our recreational programming goals or event goals. It would support those other organizations, but would that mean we then step back from running our own events? I don't think so. So both could happen.
Councillor Barry and then Councillor Richards.
Just a thought, I know that the high school, you know, each student has to have X amount of, I think it's 30 or 40 volunteer hours. Like, I wonder if there's a way to partnership with the high school, engaging youth in being involved in some of those opportunities. I'm wondering if, you know, speaking with the other municipalities, like I know, you know, probably Dysart has multiple facilities that they're trying to, you know, keep active and have there's probably different partnerships happening amongst other municipalities. So I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. And then my other thought is there a way to incentivize some of the volunteers by, I don't know, discount on memberships at some of our rec facilities or some of our programs that are existing? I'm just putting out ideas.
Kind of takes away from the word volunteer. And William, one of the things that I think that needs to be strengthened in our communications is that by striking a committee, if that's what we were to do again, it doesn't mean we're setting up a mini council to just sit around and decide, you know, what activities are going to happen, and then they expect that it will just, like, they're volunteers as well as a committee. And I think that there's been a bit of challenge there with, you know, some in the past, not necessarily the last committee, but in committees that we've had who simply meet and decide that they want things to happen and then expect staff to do it all. And we don't, I mean, you know, and technically speaking, I mean, we have Parks, Recreation and Trails as a broader group, but there's really only one person attached to recreation. And that's, you know, that's asking a lot. I think there was a time when that one person may have felt somewhat overwhelmed with, you know, the roles, given the lack of support from a committee. Councillor Richards.
I think that there's a difference between programming and events. I think programming is something that should be held within staff recreation department. Doesn't mean that, you know, people in the community can't suggest a program, offer to run the program like we do now in the enhanced partnerships we have. But this is something that needs to be contained within the township. Events are something different. They're much bigger. They require much more volunteers and a lot more effort. And I agree with Chris that, you know, we can attempt to run an event and then we don't get the volunteers from the community and then we fail. And I would really hate to see that happen with Snowball. I don't think we're there yet. That's a really, really big event that staff are now taking on entirely to hope that they get the volunteers. And I think that they will. It's much loved by the community.
Well, if you'd been at Snowball,
but
you would have seen, actually, I mean, it was a fear that I had.
Yeah.
That, you know, that's a big event.
yeah,
And, you know, I was really fearful that, you know, we weren't going to be able to be successful. I think I can fairly say that it was successful.
yeah.
Was
and
it to the magnitude that it had been before? I mean, there's some changes too that have taken place because you know, we didn't have the rec center for some period of time. Now we do. So there's an evolution happening there. But, you know, I have to say that Snowball, in my mind, and, you know, I'm not as involved as some families are, was a pretty feel-good event. I think it did well, but I mean, you're not wrong in, you know, how we make sure that it continues to be successful.
So my question is what happens when it does fail?
It's not going to fail.
Well,
No, I'm just
but what happens when we don't have enough volunteers and we're not able to put it on and we disappoint an entire community with such a large event? It's not gonna be great. So I think a good idea for the township would be to start to move in the direction of empowering the community to take over the events.
And how do
So
we do that?
we continue for the moment to continue with a staff-driven snowball, maybe the Canada Day at Oxtongue and the tree lighting. But with the goal of moving towards a program where we're partnering with organizations in the community to take on the events. With the goal of, you know, helping to fund them, helping to provide the space. It's gonna take a few years for I would think, you know, the community and these organizations to iron it out, to get it going, to make it into something. So this hybrid concept in the meantime, I agree with Deputy Mayor Dayu, I think is a good concept.
What hybrid concept?
As
I've heard a lot of ideas going around.
The like right now we maintain Snowball. We maintain maybe Canada Day, although I think that's one that Oxtongue Lake will take over very quickly if they so desire. Maybe you know, we maintain the tree lightings because they're more of a municipal thing. But we're moving in the direction of no further events that we're going to start as a township, but that we want to encourage the community to hold events, and therefore we will provide, you know, space, a little bit of funding, provided they are within a certain criteria that is accessible to all of the public.
Thoughts on that? I see nodding heads. The public cannot hear nodding heads. I keep reminding you of that. So we need thoughts on that. You know, when you say incentivize and it's literally, we provide the space, we provide funding. And like, I'm not sure that we would have enough funding to be sufficient incentive for people to take on an event, but I don't know that. Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Yeah, I hear that concern because we do have quite a number of lake associations and other potential organizations out there. So that, you know, that's a big question that we would have to resolve. I still very much like the idea of, you know, staff led on all the nuts and boltsy stuff, and then the freedom to explore with municipal support for the others, which is what the committee came back with and felt very strongly about. So I do really like that idea. My one fear in all of this is that if we're focusing the support on the facility, on the buildings, then there is a big difference between what Otter Lake might choose to do with the Dorset Recreation Center versus what Livingston Lake would like to do with the Dorset Recreation Center. It's likely that, or Trout Spawn, you know, Trout Spawn is 40 minutes down the road. It's unlikely that they would choose to want to use the Dorset Rec Center for something that they are hosting and developing, but I'm sure they'd like the support as much as Otter Lake would like the support. So, that, you know, again, those are the sorts of details that would have to be recognized and worked out if that approach were to be taken forward.
I guess my concern is, you know, and you mentioned certain specific lakes, you know, are how far are they willing to go with, because we're looking for community events, community involvement in a lot of things. You know, I see them wanting to be able to hold an event, but it wouldn't necessarily be a community-wide event, which I would struggle with, you know, us providing funding for just, you know, an event to take place in one area, like, I don't know, for Otter Lake to have a fishing derby. that's just an example. I'm hearing a lot of sort of conceptual thoughts, but, we need to sort of hone in on something concrete. Councillor Barry?
I like the idea of a sponsorship of maybe, all these lake associations are being mentioned, but there's other community groups as well, where maybe the council and staff come up with a few ideas of events that we would like to see take place from, the plethora of surveys and work we've done. Like there used to be, a really good music event up in Dorset, the wine and cheese, or the wine, words and poetry or something. But it's like maybe we could have an idea of some of what these events are, put a call out to the community groups to partner on some of these, where like it's like 50-50, like, we'll host the event, we'll take a portion of the advertising, and we'll, give X amount of staff or council time to it, in lieu of that group or partnership would have, they would put in X amount of volunteer hours. They would, help with some of the advertising and, just like break it into like little chunks of what each part of the partnership could take on. I think that's also an opportunity of having some fixed ideas of what those events would be that could be split out between a group or a lake association.
Not to put you on the spot, Madam CAO, but I'm quite sure that you've got some thoughts that you might like to toss into the discussion.
I do, and it's sort of, I'm trying to summarize everything in my mind that I've heard council say. And I'm wondering, and I'm sure Chris is doing the same thing, is if council's looking at a kind of a staff-led program with opportunities for partnerships, would it be appropriate for staff to take this away and bring back something that council might look at as a starting point? Because I think in order to make this successful, there has to be some sort of guide for staff to follow. And so that's sort of where my mind is going, is to let's take it away. Let's look at some examples of other communities. We've heard what council has said, and then bring something back, and obviously very, very draft more.
Councillor Richards?
Yeah, I really do agree with that. As I mentioned, Lake of Bays has put out a program. Hamilton has a really huge, enormous one. And I'm sure there's other municipalities that do. And I think it would help council to know what those are. And then we can further that discussion.
Yeah, and I'm not to take away from it sounds to me like Hamilton's done a lot of good work. But I mean, we are so far away from what they are that, we need to look at, places like Lake of Bays or other smaller rural communities and what we can find that's similar that would work for us, because we just don't have the resources that Hamilton does. So I guess, I'm sort of hearing that you'd like to hear some kind of guide, give staff some opportunity to work on this and bring something back to us. I'm not sure how long it would take. But one thing that I would say, it's kind of unfortunate that with our absolute, complete agreement that we need to focus on the parking plan this year, that it takes away from your ability to work on the recreation master plan, because it kind of sounds like, it's a bit of a cart before the horse. Because if we had a recreation master plan, we would have that guidelines, those, we would have those solid goals and where we want to go. In the meantime, we're trying to figure out what to do, what the best direction is. So is council, well, before I ask this question, I'll go and see the comments from Councillor Barry, then yourself.
I just think it should also, for people that are tuned in or hearing this discussion, like Algonquin Highlands offers a pretty strong recreation. Maybe we don't have the facilities that some of the larger communities have, like I'm thinking pools and arenas and that type of thing. But as far as outdoors go, and like our trail system, soccer, all of that, and some of our outdoor facilities that have very low cost, I think I think that's what sets us apart. So I think trying to necessarily checking off the boxes that other municipalities have doesn't make us, at the same magnitude of them. I think it's important to recognize the recreation that we do offer. That's my one thought.
Deputy Mayor Dayu.
If I may be so obvious as to say, it would be my hope that in investigating what different partnerships might look like within this model and looking at other examples in Ontario, we might consider things like the community center that has been leased to a community as a model of partnership. It is one way of engaging on recreation, which is as valid as several other models. So maybe the conversation about Oxtongue that I hope council concurs to just start to look at could fit within the, hey, this is a model of partnership that we might
Works.
consider as part of the same
I
parcel.
I am in no way thinking that Oxtongue is off the table or how that might work. As you say, it's a form of partnership that has been successful in other areas, and I would expect that some of the work that's done is investigate that partnership. That's, I'm assuming, is it Lake of Bays or like, um, if they've got a working example, we can look at it, see if it might fit for us or not as part of a partnership, as well as any other thoughts and ideas. Like I'm hearing a lot of philosophical thinking without us really landing somewhere. So, if staff can bring back, having heard, what we've said here, if you can bring something back for us to mull over again. Is there anything else that you think you need from us specifically at this point in time?
Um, I think what I'll end up doing is looking at what some of these other organizations do, look at examples from other municipalities, council. As I get into that and the research develops, I might find more, but ultimately council will then see probably some examples of this is what several communities are doing in relation to a partnership for a community center. Here's what several communities are doing in relationship to the incentivized program. And here's some possibilities of what might work out for us. And then that would form the next step in the discussion. In the meantime, I would move towards, I'm just thinking about this year's events, of course, and we'll be getting right into Planning Canada
That was going
Day.
to be my next
As
question.
soon as we get through conversations with the Volunteer Appreciation Day, is that we'll still have a need to move towards those staff-led and make calls for volunteers. And I would assume that would be council's wish, but that's how we proceed with them.
Sound good? Councillor Barry?
I really do like Chris's idea of a volunteer recruitment. I do think that that's, no matter what we do,
We need
we're
to
not,
do
we're
that.
not gonna do it without people. So I think that that's something that should be at the forefront.
Okay, any other thoughts at this point in time? Well, then I propose that we break for, take a 15-minute break. We'll call the meeting back to order. Next on the agenda is under Public Works, you'll see the changes as discussed at the last meeting on the terms of reference for the Airport Committee, and that will be brought forward under bylaws. So next is the under Finance, the wrap up of our budget discussions. Welcome, Madam Treasurer. Over to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So I prepared a report on the second draft of the budget in response to our deliberations over the 2 days of 27th and 28th of February. We did start with a municipal levy of 7.03%, which added about $470,908 to the levy. And over the course of the 2 days, each council and staff reviewed the budget in detail and removed several items, including the stationary truck services at Hawk Lake, reducing the funds to establish the parking master plan. Council and staff agreed we wouldn't proceed with the pickleball courts project at this time. We removed the costs related to the wrap for the maintenance trailer. We reduced the contribution to reserve for Trails Cost Center, and council approved an additional wage increase of 2% in response to market trends and neighboring municipalities. All of these, and a good news thing is all of these work that we did actually reduced the amount that we had planned initially to use from the reserves. We had a reduction of 11% initially, and with all of the changes, we reduced that reduction to 6%. So at the end of the day, council and staff were able to reduce the levy by approximately 1.41%, which is a cost savings of $94,650 on a $7 million budget. So I think we did great. The second draft represents a levy increase of 5.62%, which equates to an additional $376,250 in comparison to 2024. And it works out to a municipal tax rate increase of 4.26%. And then when you add in county and education, our new tax rate would be 4.095%. I'm correct. And that actually, the municipal portion of the increase, it works out to about $15.98 annually for every 100,000 in assessment on residential taxes.
Are there any questions, or is there anything that we felt we missed in our discussion? Because today's the day
Correct.
to bring anything up that we missed. Councillor Richards.
On the parking discussion that we had and the fees that we put aside for consulting, I just wanted to clarify in that whether or not we've included enough for community engagement as part of that, because I think that's very important. I know it was in the big parking master plan when it was at 100, but in this smaller one.
Who would like to respond to that? Nothing like mobile mics.
They're quite handy. No, it doesn't. Again, I haven't had an opportunity yet to re-engage the consultant who gave us this budgetary quote to get an updated proposal specific to this. So all of the costs associated with what I used to put the budget together were them considering a fulsome plan. But in that, and I'm looking at it here on my screen, the community engagement portion was an additional 10,000.
which is not included in the budget.
Correct.
I would have thought, I mean, it was a substantial amount that we set aside for a consultant, and I had, one should never do this, but I had assumed that, you know, most projects like that are run by a consultant do include community engagement, but you're saying in this case it doesn't. So good question. Madam Treasurer?
If I may, the plan was that we had allocated $20,000 and it was being funded from the parking reserve. So inevitably, we could stick with that number if we wish, increase it if you wish as well. But either way, you're gonna fund it from the reserve, so it's not going to have a dollar effect or a percentage effect on the levy at all.
Okay, so we can still move ahead without making a change.
Correct.
Councillor Richards?
So, my understanding, you know, council does agree that we want to have community engagement in that discussion. And I'm wondering if so, given that the parking plan is about the philosophy behind parking and further decisions regarding specifically parking at the Hawks is going to be made after those discussions. Is there any impact to what we have or potential impact to the public works budget in what we may or may not do as far as those engineering costs that we have set aside to do something about the parking there?
These are questions that should have been asked last week. But, you know, I would look for comments from staff about that. Keeping in mind the parking plan is for the entire municipality, not just for the Hawks. You know, that's got to be spread out, and, you know, if we're going to have community consultation, it's got to be community-wide. Mr. Card and then Mr. Thorne.
So the quote for the plan that I have does not include any engineering considerations for the Hawks, which I'd let Mr. Thorne speak to.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. No, there would be no engagement with the community on the project that I am proposing. None of that was put into our discussion with the engineer.
You know, I thought that, you know, the discussions we had kind of covered our priorities and the direction that we want to move in. I don't know how far we want to go with changing the budget now. You are like, what are your expectations specifically?
Well, I think that it would be unwise to make plans for parking that are then going to require those stakeholders affected to pay for, and they don't want to pay for it, and then we've built a parking lot that nobody wants to pay for. I don't think that's a wise path to take.
I'm going to go to back to Adam and then to Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Thank you. So through the discussion with the parking lots that we've had since 2018, it's always been the decision to look at a paid for parking option. But the part of the projects that we're working on here, these two projects, is one will be all the parking, like you said, on the road. So there's not, I'm not saying that we couldn't take some kind of comment from the public, but at the end of the day, we're kind of restrained to what we can do within our road allowance that the engineer will be familiar with, and obviously staff themselves. So we're very limited as to what we can do without getting into huge construction projects like in that area, blasting the rock and purchasing land. And that hasn't been directed by council. So the information that the engineer has brought forward has been based on what council has brought to staff to date. As far as the log chute parking, which is the second project up there, That is to do conceptual drawings and design and then bring all that back to council with costing. From there, I guess like any other report that staffs bring forward, if there is concerns from the public, they would bring them forward, I would assume so. Other than that, we're at the design stage, I guess. So I don't know how much we could really involve the public based on, we don't know what we're looking at yet for the area.
Well, in many discussions that we have had, considering the volume of parking that's required for the Hawks area and the safety concerns that are in place, like part of the parking plan is community-wide and all the docks and landings and what's needed with respect to parking, which is a lot less than what's needed at the Hawks. And we have come to an agreement numerous times about pay to play. You know, if we're not going to spend extraordinary amounts of money that is all taxpayers' money, and I mean, why would, I guess it's a philosophical thing, but you know, I can see, you know, people from other parts of the municipality saying like, why are we spending all this money for a parking lot for the Hawks? And why shouldn't they be contributing to it? Like, to me, it's an easy, it's a fair place to land, that if you want to have 2 or 3 vehicles parked there, you have to pay for parking. Deputy Mayor Dayu.
This is where I think lake association meetings in the summer could provide a valuable opportunity. You know, if we approach them and said, we've got these philosophical questions in our minds and we'd like to just touch base with you. What do you think about that? What would be your primary concerns about this? What would you see as the greatest opportunity for that? And we harvest those ideas and we bring them back. And it's a light, simple litmus test on public perception with the people who are most directly impacted by it. But certainly, and we've had these sorts of conversations in the past, public consultation to impact and engineering design is not what we would be after. It's, you know, and it wouldn't be, you know, how much would it be or like those things, no. It's introducing the concept and getting some feedback. And I think the Lake Association meetings are really an ideal time to do that.
I agree. Madam CAO.
I also think that the philosophy portion is prime opportunity for us to utilize our communications coordinator. To gather that information.
Councillor Richards.
I think my biggest concern is the complications surrounding parking on the Hawks specifically, in that there is Crown land where there's parking that we do not control, that is free to use. And then we are looking at providing parking as far away as possible and charging them for it. And those are competing issues that I think are going to create a lot of controversy. And until we have the philosophy of what we're going to do, proceeding with engineering is unwise.
Mr. Thorne.
I guess I just want to bring back that we've been talking about this for 6 years. So, I mean, the public that has come out to say anything hasn't really brought anything forward that I'm aware of, other than a proposed location, which was when we discussed the Hawk landfill closure. Other than that, I mean, without procuring land from the ministry, we own land in the area, and that's where we're proposing to build on. The parking area, and I may be confused on where you're referring to, but the parking area across from the log chute, that's our property. That's the township's property. A small portion of it is ministry property, of course, but majority of that is our property. So again, and I can go back to the conversation last week, is that if we build these items, then they would have to be policed so that we enforce the use of them and not allowing people to park on the road, or it kind of defeats the purpose of what we're doing.
I'm going to go to the CAO and then back to you, Councillor Richards.
I just want to make sure that we as staff understood the conversation that council had. In that I understood the conversation to be that, yes, we wanted to do the philosophy and have the consultant to come in and help us with that. But the Hawks were, council wanted to do something with the Hawks.
Yes.
That's what, okay, I just want to make sure.
Acknowledging that it is the worst, most issue with safety as recently discovered. Councillor Richards.
The area I'm referring to that is Crown Land is the area that is immediately in front of the launch, on the hillside, up around the Bay Trail, which is a substantial amount of parking that would be in competition with any paid parking that we would provide. But also, the community is not going to come forward with ideas. They have ideas, but they're not going to come forward with those ideas formally unless we ask them to. And I think they are going to have a lot to say once they understand the plan that we are thinking of putting forward.
I'm still not quite sure where you're going with this with respect to the budget.
I would not want to proceed with hiring an engineer to design parking while we do not have the philosophy first.
I mean, honestly, I'm a little bit disappointed that this conversation is taking place at this point. We put all the money we could possibly put, all of our energy into saying, yes, parking is a priority in a number of different ways, putting as much money as we possibly could into parking, how that is spent and how that falls into the schedule of events like in planning or consulting or, are you suggesting that I'm not hearing that you're suggesting that the budget change, you're just talking about the process. So I'm looking for change that we need to make in the budget. Like we've been given a report saying, here's where we're at with the budget. Is there something specific that we've missed? Is there some misunderstanding? Do we need to add to it? Do we need to take away from it?
I don't feel we need to change the budget, but
Well,
I
that's where
don't
we're-
need this conversation to be forgotten either.
Given the amount of emphasis that we put on the importance of parking, I very much doubt that we're going to forget about having further discussions about it, as long as we've got sufficient in the budget to move, depending on where our discussion takes. And I think that we've covered that. Madam CAO?
If council gives the direction that we have the philosophy discussion first before design work happens, staff will not forget that.
So rest assured that we will make sure that, that we agree on the direction that we're going. And I'm not sure how much or how we go about consulting specifically. This is a plan parking for the municipality, not just for the Hawks. So if we're going to talk to people, we're going to talk to everybody, not just the Hawks or Hull's Hawks, because that's the name of the association, not just the Hawks. Councillor Berry. I was sure I saw your hand up.
Well, I don't know whether to step in it or not. I think the philosophy is there's congestion and safety issues and an increased demand for parking. So I feel like the master plan, if that didn't offer those considerations, I don't know what other philosophy there is. That's just my opinion.
Well, it sounds like we need to have a discussion about that. Overall, I'm just like right now, I'm concerned with the budget and whether we've budgeted enough to cover, the work that we need to do. Mr. Thorne.
Thank you. Just so I can get clarity, is it expected that we would not move forward with the engineering until we've had this consultation? And if so, who does it? Because
does-
of, yeah.
It
just-
sounds like we need to have a conversation right here at this table. And I think we would start with that, and the sooner that we do that, the better, you know, on our list of priorities for agendas. Deputy Mayor Dayu?
When it comes to the Hawks specifically, because we all agree that's the
An
most
issue.
urgent, I cannot foresee how a conversation about philosophy could in any way, shape, or form impact the engineering design of the space, because there is such limited opportunity there. Like, we really have only a few possibilities for parking. So we can't magically create more space if if the people say they don't like how far away a parking lot is, or whatever it might be. The fact is, they need the parking, and they're the first to say they need the parking, and this is what we can provide for them. So I would think I'd prefer to see staff figure out the sequencing, because to get the contracting done, and then, the tendering and all of those things, that takes time. And to delay until after we have a philosophical conversation that very well likely won't change that process, I think that's a weeds question.
The only issue that I'm thinking about is where we stand with the conversations with the ministry about accessing Crown land, and whether there'd be, some different opportunities for location that might be reasonably cost effective. And I don't know where we are with those conversations, but if they're at a standstill, we need to poke somebody.
Oh, they're definitely not at a standstill. The ministry actually just reached out this week. They were waiting for me to get back from vacation, so
And to get elected again too.
fair enough. So I'm hoping we can schedule something next week.
Okay,
Mhm.
good. Okay, go ahead.
Just to say, I do totally agree with you. Depending on those discussions about possible Crown land instead of our land, which is the furthest away possible, that may be the option, and that would definitely alter engineering plans.
With respect to the furthest away possible, when I look and see how far people are already walking when they're parked, for kilometers down the road, there's got to be a way to manage that, to shuttle themselves back and forth a little bit, or whatever. I mean, they're already parking a heck of a long way from the launch and from the marina. Mr. Soren, did you have another comment? Back to the budget is what we're talking about. I just, like, with respect to the budget, I once again want to thank all of staff for the work that's been done. I'm so tickled that we have come in below every other municipality in the county, including the county. So job well done to staff and council. Any other questions about the documentation that we've been provided? So what have we got for a resolution?
To approve the tax rate bylaw to be brought forward at the next meeting, and to authorize staff to proceed with the proposed projects.
Could I have a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Sherreed and Deputy Mayor Dayu.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Deputy Mayor Dayu. Be it resolved that Council receives Treasury Report TT 825 regarding the summary of the changes in relation to the 2025 budget, and Council approves the revenues and expenditures as outlined in the 2025 budget second draft, and hereby directs staff to prepare the tax rate bylaw to be brought forward at the March 20th, 2025 regular meeting of Council, and that staff are hereby authorized to proceed with the proposed projects as presented in the 2025 budget second draft.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you. So next, under administration business, is a discussion on the election voting method. I think we'd look to our clerk to provide some information.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So the purpose of this report is to recommend to Council the use of internet telephone voting in the 2026 municipal election. Council may recall, we used this form of voting in the last election. It was very successful with a lot of positive feedback received from the public. Should we proceed with this, the clerks around in the county would like to pursue a joint venture like we did last time. That collaboration was very successful in building the RFP, working together on training events for candidates, advertising, public information. Part of using the internet telephone voting last year, we had a voting area set up in the council chambers, which was well used. We had over 60 people come in and use it and vote. We offered 2 Saturdays nearing the election for people to come in. They needed help voting or getting on the voters list. We had a few people come in, but those were options that would still stay in place for this to allow electors to have the opportunity to reach us. We had tablets for additional accessibility, should someone need to vote on a tablet or need assistance. And we're just looking for council's direction to move forward.
So we would have telephone voting, internet voting, and the ability for people to come in here.
Yes, the same as last year.
Yeah, because I think that that's still really important. You know, we've got a certain part of the population that wants to be able to do something physically, come to, you know, their voting station and are just not completely comfortable with telephone and internet voting without assistance of some sort.
Yeah, the voting at the office would be via internet though, but yes.
Councillor Shortreed. Oh, thought I saw your hand up. Any comments or questions on that? Deputy Mayor Dayu?
Yeah, I like it. I think we should absolutely support the clerk's recommendations. My slightly tangential question or request would be, could we consider within those methods how we can broadcast publicly that people with secondary residences in Algonquin Highlands have the right to vote in municipal elections? Because that remains a challenge. People just don't know that. So I don't know if they're not receiving something in the mail, then yeah, if we could just consider what, how we might do that so that everyone knows they have the right to vote.
Which is something that I brought up at a previous meeting not too long ago, but that, well in advance, we have the communications coordinator work on informing folks of that sort of thing. What's available to them and what their rights are and what they need to think about as far as responsibilities. And Councillor Richards.
I agree with that. There is some confusion too. Some people think that they can vote here, but if they do so, they can't vote there. So they pick and choose when in fact they can vote in both. So that's just information that needs to be really understood by the public.
We keep telling them, but it just takes with some people, that if they're not tuned in to social media or websites, they just don't get the message.
And I just wanted to make sure I do understand that they can come into the township office if they need help to use a tablet here.
Right.
What about at the other end of our township? Like, do we have any ability for them, or do they have to drive all the way down here to do that if they have to?
We could look at, now that the Dorset Recreation Center is open, putting a station in there. It's the only accessible area. It would have to be staffed, of course, and only operational during staff because it has to be visible. Staff would have to be trained, which we can do at the Dorset Rec Center to assist voters that may have to come in for assistance. But that location is open now and has accessible doorways, and so it could be accommodated should council wish.
Any idea what the financial impact of that would be? Because you had commented that we only have X amount of dollars in reserve, and I just want to make sure that we're covered.
I think it could be accommodated. It's a matter of renting the equipment. IT assistance is required. However, that would be during normal working hours to go and set up the system for us. They're not required to be on site by any means. So I feel confident it could be in the budget that we have.
I think that's a good suggestion. I know that we couldn't necessarily do it in Oxtongue as well, but that's a lot closer and offers more opportunities for people to vote. Would council agree with moving in that direction? Do you need to change the resolution?
No.
Okay, could I have a mover and a seconder? Deputy Mayor Dayu. Councillor Shortreed, thank you.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Dayu, seconded by Councillor Shortreed. Be it resolved that council receives clerk's report CO 525 regarding the 2026 municipal election voting method for information, and council concurs with the recommendations made in the said report, and that the voting method of internet telephone for the 2026 election be approved, and the council authorize staff to proceed with the issuance of a joint RFP with any local municipalities utilizing internet telephone voting for the 2026 election. And further, council directs a bylaw be brought forward at a future meeting of council authorizing the alternative voting method in accordance with section 42(1)(b) of the Municipal Elections Act as amended.
All in favor? That's carried. Next are the cemetery bylaw revisions as required. I'm suspecting that we'll be hearing from Ms. Hudson on that matter.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So
Good
I
morning.
have heard back from the BAO, the Bereavement Authority Ontario, for our submission for our bylaw. They have made some recommendations, which I've highlighted in my report. For the most part, administrative, a couple of things were implied, but they wanted clarity. For example, number one, that we add that we don't do pet remains. It's always been assumed with us speaking in human remains, but they asked that we add that specifically. A couple of the other changes are legislative. Number one, number three in my list was just more about clarification. That is the process we adhere to, is how we handle interment rights. So they just wanted a little bit more clear language added in. And other than that, they were all suggestions. So if council's supportive of the changes, then I will submit to the BAO this afternoon. And once we have revisions, they've asked for a couple other things that I can provide in relation to the layout of the green burial section. So I can provide them that information, and then hopefully we will hear from them soon, and I will be back with an adoption of a bylaw.
Any questions or concerns about what's being proposed? So what's your estimate, your best estimate? Because I know that it's hard to pin down another group about how long it would be before we can actually get past the bylaw and move forward.
So when I submit these to the bylaw, initially when we first started this process, the BAO had estimated 16 weeks. Now they've reviewed our entire bylaw and commented very positively about it, with the exception of just making these small revisions. I don't foresee there being a long time delay for them to get back to us, but I don't know. So if we're taking the time back to the 16 weeks and I submit it, I think we'll have about 3 to 4 weeks, but I don't know. But I will certainly ask the BAO when I do submit the revisions.
Okay, thanks very much. Questions, comments? Could I have a mover and a seconder then to approve the recommended changes? Deputy Mayor Dayu, Councillor Berry. Actually, I was pleased to see that their recommendations come back as quickly as they did.
Moved by Deputy Mayor Dayu, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved, council receives report DC 325 regarding proposed cemetery bylaw amendments for information, and the council concurs with the recommended revision and directs staff to submit the revised bylaw to the Bereavement Authority of Ontario for approval in accordance with the requirements of Funeral, Burial, and Cremation Services Act.
All in favor? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
I know this has been a lot of work for you, so we really do appreciate the work you put into it. Next under planning is the minutes of the Committee of Adjustment. Are there any questions on that? Could I have a mover and a seconder to approve them? Councillor Shortreed and Berry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, second by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved, the council receives the January 31st, 2025 Committee of Adjustment meeting minutes for information.
All in favor? That's carried. So external board meetings, any updates on the community partnership or the Dorset Health Hub?
No, that won't be till the end of April.
Okay, thank you. Anything on Upper Trent Water Management?
Nothing on the Upper Trent water management, although I'd like there to be. I think I'm gonna send out an email to find out what we're doing. I'd especially like an update for the spring season, which will shortly be upon us. And the Muskoka watershed, I was unable to go to the last meeting, as I mentioned at the last council meeting. And I'll bring you an update after the next one.
Okay, do they send out any information or you get copies of minutes or anything after a meeting that you could maybe let us know anything of note?
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily available by the time of our next council meeting, but they do have minutes posted on their website that can be downloaded.
Okay, well, if there's anything of note in those minutes, we would look for you to bring us up to date. OPP Detachment Board, we are meeting at the end of March, so I'll have more information with respect to their work then. Anything on the library? Anything on community safety and well-being? Muskoka River Watershed Communications,
Yes, I have news. And
Oh,
it
right.
is, yeah, and it's
that they're going to
helpful.
change their name and
Oh,
shorten it.
that's right. So we are probably going to start meeting a little bit more frequently now because the spring freshet is in the foreseeable future. But as of right now, within the Muskoka River watershed, water levels are at or below average levels. The snow water equivalent is just slightly above average level. In layman's speak, it looks like we've got a lot of snow out there, but actually, if you translate that into volume of water, it's not as much as one would foresee. So it's only slightly, it's at 105% of the average level. So that's relatively good news. They are not able to start predicting spring freshet or flooding until, they won't even think about trying until late March or early April. Having said that, they have no major concerns at this time. And interestingly, they noted that they don't, in fact, measure frost levels when they are looking at all of this. So whether we've got an inch of frost in the ground or 6 feet of frost in the ground, although that would change water runoff, it doesn't currently form part of their analysis. So that was interesting. But they are assuming that there could be some localized events because, places further down the watershed have had a bit more snow than others this year, but they of course take a whole of watershed approach to water management and are very prepared to lower the lake levels to the bottom of the normal operating zone if and when they start to get the warning signs that any flooding might occur. So as of now, in short, things are in order, but anything could happen at any time to change that. If we get a lot more snow or if we get a lot more rain or temperature changes, whatever it might be. So they're not putting any money on it, but right now it seems fine.
Well, that's good to hear, because I've been hearing a lot of concern, people are, looking and thinking, holy smokes, I mean, this is more snow than we've had for a long time. But the other issue is the issue of frost. And it's interesting that they don't measure frost because I've heard that there isn't as much frost as there might normally be, which allows, more saturation into the ground and reduces the risk. So we just keep our fingers crossed that we stay in good order. With respect to county council update, we had a rather short meeting, the last meeting that we had, because Warden Burton took everyone out for lunch. So, we wanted to allow for that. The discussion that I had spoken about at our last meeting was that we were going to be looking at service delivery and having a serious and in-depth discussion about what opportunities we still see that there are so that staff know for once and for all, okay, here's where we want to go, and if there's still work to be done, or you can let that one go. You know, there's some anxiety on the part of staff about their work schedules and what they're required to do, and we'd hope to resolve that. But because that would be, you know, several hours, there wasn't time at the last meeting. So that is scheduled, I believe, for March the 12th. And I'm just trying to think of the other burning issue that council is, I mean, it's sort of council is involved peripherally, is to the topic of the Highlands corridor that the Land Trust is seeking support from County Council for. There has been a lot of kind of misinformation that's been put out there, misunderstanding about what this actually means. And so there will be a special meeting being held in Wilberforce in their community center when county has their, I think it's March 26th meeting. We'll be there. We'll have the regular meeting and a public meeting with respect to the Highlands corridor. So everybody can ask questions. There'll be more information provided and hopefully clarity, and we can, you know, see the Land Trust move forward or not, you know, depending on what is heard at that time. So those are probably, I can't think of any other topics that came forward that need to be brought here. So that's it for County Council. Are there any notices of motion? Hearing none. Was there any interest in any of the correspondence in particular?
No.
Could I have a mover and a seconder then to receive the correspondence listing? Councillor Barry and Richards.
Moved by Council Berry, seconded by Council Richards. Be it resolved, Council received the March 6, 2025 correspondence listing for information.
All in favor? That's carried. Next is a motion mover and a seconder with respect to the bylaws, keeping in mind that some of them have been removed from this list, given that we did not hear the report on the amps. Or are there any separate? Oh, yeah, there is. Okay. Mover and a seconder for the bylaws. Councillor Shortreed and Barry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that the following bylaw be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed. 2025-31 being a bylaw to establish a terms of reference for the airport committee.
All in favor? That's carried. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the confirmatory bylaw? Councillor Shortreed and Councillor Berry.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Councillor Berry. Be it resolved that bylaw 2025-32 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held during its March 6, 2025 regular meeting be received and read a first time, considered read a second and third time, and finally passed with the corporate seal affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, motion to adjourn. Councillor Shortreed, Deputy Mayor Dayo.
Moved by Councillor Shortreed, seconded by Deputy Mayor Dayu. Be it resolved the March 6, 2025 regular meeting is hereby adjourned at 11:10 a.m.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everyone.